Welcome everybody. Glad you all made it to the Grit City Think and Drink. I'm your host, Jim Gowell. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, Tacoma in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. I need to put a plug in there for my employer so they keep paying me. So I just wanted to put that out there. Glad to see some folks that I know and maybe some newbies in here. And it's too bad that we're actually not meeting in person because if you get a new person to come to one of these talks, the new person buys beer for everybody. So make sure that when we start doing this in person again, that you bring a new person in so that we keep this tradition going. Right now, I guess we're just out of luck. You have to do it on your own. But just to let you know, so this happens every second Tuesday of the month, mostly. Occasionally there's some reschedules, especially during the time of COVID. But the November talk, I wanted to give a quick message. I just found out our speaker for the November talk, Ricky Thompson, is not able to give the talk in November. So if you have an idea for a speaker, or if you would like to give a talk, you can send me a message in the chat, or you can email me at jimgowell@uw.edu and let me know, and we'll get you set up for that November 10th slot. But if we don't find a talk for that one, we're going to be missing one, which will be the first month we have missed for one of these talks since the start of the whole COVID thing. So this will be the first one that we've missed otherwise. But let me know if you have some ideas. But otherwise, December 8th, the second Tuesday in December, Dr. Carolyn West from UW-Tacoma will be giving a talk about why Black Wives Matter, basically. So she's going to be talking about the porn industry and the images of Black women. So she's an amazing speaker, known her for at least 20 years, and it should be a really interesting talk. So I hope you'll come back in December and we'll let you know. So keep an eye out on the Grit City Think and Drink page, which you found, I guess, to get onto this. That will have all of the old talks, by the way. You can always go back and look at or share that with other people. So all of these recordings are made available so that you can actually check them out afterwards. But we'll also be sending out messages on Facebook and through there if we get a speaker for November 10th. So we'll let you know. That's the thrust of it. Another thing is, if you didn't know, we do give away stuff. So it's harder to give away things than it was before, but we still are going to do it. So after I introduce our speaker and she gives an amazing talk, we'll take a short break and we'll actually give away some swag. We'll give away some swag while Jim throws his computer on the ground. And what we'll be giving away is these Think and Drink socks. So these are the bomb, basically. So they're still in the packaging, brand new. So hopefully you can win some of that. If you didn't know, we gave away hats, we give away shirts, and now we're up to socks. So soon it's gonna be underwear and jeans. So if anybody's got somebody who can put logos on those, let me know. So we'll do that afterwards, and then we'll open up question and answer with our speaker, and you can try to stump Shannon with whatever questions that you have. And that's the gist of it. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker. Dr. Shannon Seidel is an assistant professor of biology at Pacific Lutheran University, who earned her PhD studying HIV host pathogen interactions before transitioning to science education research during her postdoctoral fellowship. Her research focuses on the non-content language known as instructor talk that is broadly used by instructors and may be important for engaging students, evading stereotype threat, and generating student buy-in for active learning. Currently, she teaches courses like Introductory Biology, Virology, and the Science Education Partnership, which provides science students with an opportunity to teach in K-12 classrooms. So without further ado, Dr. Shannon Seidel.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm excited to get to talk to you all and engage with you. So I hope you are ready to do a little bit of talking as well, because that is something you'll see happening in a few minutes. So you can have a drink, clear your throat a bit, because I'll get you talking soon. Before I do that, though, I guess I should acknowledge my employer as well, so they keep paying me. Pacific Lutheran University is where I come from. And before that, I did a postdoc at the Science Education Partnership and Assessment Lab, CEPL, at San Francisco State University. So you'll see some of my work that was initiated there. But as I get started, I want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. So I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Nisqually, Puyallup, Squaxin Island, and Steilacoom peoples, and we acknowledge and respect the traditional caretakers of this land. I particularly want to do this as it's the day after Indigenous Peoples Day, but just as a regular practice as well, to make this acknowledgement and express my gratitude. Okay, so my goal for our time together, I have a few goals. I'm hoping to unpack some concrete and evidence-based teaching strategies that add structure and learning environments and promote fairness and student success. I'm hoping that I can show you these 21 common equity strategies and have you at least think about and explore the evidence behind a couple of them. We won't get to all 21 because we don't have time for all of that. Oh, am I not sharing my screen? I need to be sharing my screen, don't I? Let's see. Zoom has disappeared a bit for me, so let me get back on here. All right, tell me, Jim, can you give me a nod if you can see my screen now? Okay, we're back. We're back together. Apologies for that. All right, here's the goals I just read to you. And the third goal that I have for our time together is that you will be able to identify at least one of these equity strategies that might be useful in your personal and or professional life. Because I think even though these equity strategies I'm going to talk about are about teaching all students in science classrooms, I think that they're really useful far beyond science classrooms. And so I hope you'll consider it from whatever perspective you come from. Okay, so we're going to start with considering the challenges here. And so I want you to think about this question. What are some equity challenges that college students might face in STEM classrooms, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math classrooms? What are some equity challenges you think college students might face in STEM classrooms? And to give you a chance to discuss this, I'm actually going to send you to breakout rooms. And I'm not sure if that's something that has traditionally happened in this environment in the Grit City Think and Drink, but we're going to give it a try. So you're going to go to a room with about 3 or 4 people and just have a quick conversation about this, maybe 3 minutes or so. So when I click this button, you're going to have the chance to click on a button to join a Zoom room, and it'll sort of transport you to that room for about 3 minutes, and then we'll all come back together and hear out from those conversations. So try and unmute if you are able to when you head into those rooms, and I will send the question to the rooms as well, just for you to think about it again. Hi there to those of you who are still here. If you want to chat in this room, we could all just chat here if you weren't able to get to a breakout room. If you're with us. hopefully they can. And okay, welcome back, everyone, as you're joining us. Feel free to share some of your conversation in the chat window as you're coming back in. So you discussed what are some equity challenges college students might face in STEM classes. And now that I have you thinking about that topic and thinking about students in STEM classes, I'm actually going to switch things up just a little bit and have you think about your experience going into a breakout room with a group of perhaps strangers, perhaps colleagues or friends, depending on who you ended up with in that breakout room. And I want to say, as we debrief the equity part of the discussions you just had, there's no right way to have handled that or wrong way. There's no good guys or bad guys or heroes or villains in this. But I think it's useful in thinking about how equity plays out in a classroom to kind of experience it. So in that conversation, I didn't give you a whole bunch of direction or structure in terms of what you did in your group. So I wonder to what extent your group felt equitable. So the conversation you just had with 3 or 4 people, did it feel like an equitable conversation? Did everyone share ideas? Did someone sort of take the role of facilitator on? Did someone record your ideas maybe, or ask other people to share their ideas? And if you did any of these things, how did your group decide? Did somebody ask who should talk first, or did someone start talking? What was it like in your group? So I just want you to reflect on that for a second, because this plays into how people experience STEM classrooms and really any kind of classroom or learning environment. So I'm actually going to send you back to those breakout rooms, and I'm going to use some equity strategies in the process to have you think about how those conversations went. So I wonder if you'll share out now in your breakout rooms what your experience was like in that first discussion, so that we're getting a little bit meta here. And think about yourself and what identities might have played a role in your experience. Maybe you have never been in a STEM classroom, so you felt like you didn't have much to share. Maybe you tended to defer to people who are older or seem more senior than you, and so you sort of sat back. Maybe you're an introvert. What identities do you have that might have played into whether you jumped into the conversation or held back a little bit? And this time I'm going to ask you to do this with a little bit of structure. I'm going to ask the person in your group who has the longest hair, which might be hard to figure out if you don't have cameras on. So you might have another way of deciding your facilitator if you don't have your cameras on. And then I'm going to ask that facilitator to help make sure that everybody kind of goes in alphabetical order. We're going to call that a whip around, where everyone shares for about 30 seconds or so your experience and what identities you think played into that. Okay, so I'm going to send you back to the breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. So each person has 30 seconds to a minute to share, and then we'll come back together. All right, welcome back. As you're coming back, how did those conversations go? Did it get cut short? I can always tell it's a good conversation when people don't come back till the very end. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So it's nice to see more of your faces. People are sort of popping in, and it's always nice to see your audience a bit. So how did those conversations go? You can tell me in the chat window if you had some insight or epiphany on identities that contributed. It's always interesting to see. And how did it go with having some structure in terms of the facilitation? Who was supposed to be in charge? It probably took a minute to figure out who had the longest hair, who was going to be your facilitator. Certainly there are many other ways to facilitate besides longest hair. There are many different things you could use. But I just want to give that a try to give you a sense. So So let's talk a little bit more. And are my slides sharing with you now, or do I need to share again? They're sharing? Okay, thanks for thumbs up. So one of my big ideas that I want to share is about how structuring learning environments promotes fairness and access for all students, because really that's our goal, right? If I'm teaching a STEM course, I want every single one of my students to succeed in that course. And I want them all to feel like they have an equal shot at succeeding, and like they are included and welcomed and a part of the STEM environment. And so some things that I want to convey are that unstructured learning environments can lead to unfairness, feelings of exclusion, collisions of students' cultural backgrounds with the learning environment. And you may or may not have experienced that in these small groups. This is a little different than a STEM science class or science class. But when we add structure in, we can mitigate some of this unfairness, we can promote feelings of inclusion, and we can give everyone access by creating structure in the learning environment. One of the steps towards cultural competence is using teaching strategies that add that kind of structure, okay? So that's some of the things we're gonna talk about today. But before we get there, I wanna tell you about active learning. That might be something that you've heard of, might be something that's new to you. This is a very recent paper that shows how active learning in the sciences and STEM courses narrows achievement gaps for underrepresented students. So the people who tend to feel most excluded in STEM environments are the people who are the most underrepresented. So that can be students of color, that can be students who are the first in their family to go to college, that can be students who are from low-income backgrounds, who just don't necessarily see themselves in science. They might not be reflected in the faculty, they might not be reflected in who does science. And so what we know is that there are long-standing achievement gaps, that underrepresented students tend to succeed at lower rates. So what this paper here showed by looking at lots of different studies is that active learning, so things where students are not just listening to a lecture, but actually engaging with the material, talking in small groups like you just did in those Zoom breakout rooms, closes that achievement gap. So a passive classroom is one where there tends to just be lecture happening. And what you can see is if the goal is to have a 0 achievement gap, anything below this red dashed line at 0 is an achievement gap. We don't want to see that, right? We want no achievement gap. So 0 is ultimately the goal here. And if we look both at exam scores and the gap in the % of students passing, we see that using active learning makes that gap smaller. It closes the gap, right? That's true both for exam scores and % passing. This is a paper that was published just this year out of the University of Washington, wonderful colleagues there at UW Seattle who published this work. And it's a really fabulous paper, but it shows how important active learning is to making an equitable classroom environment in STEM courses. So one question you might ask then is, how do we know if active learning is actually happening in a class? Well, there's lots of ways to do this. Faculty can self-report. Sometimes they're not as good at doing that as they want to be. They might be more aspirational at times. There are classroom observation tools where people go in and actually observe what's happening in the class. Or there are other ways like measuring the sound levels. So one of the studies that I've been involved with is using decibel analysis to assess what's happening in classrooms. So I'm going to show you these 2 class sessions, and on the y-axis here you see decibel levels, or just the amount of noise in the classroom. It's measured every half a second here. And then this x-axis is just showing the time in the class. So this is over like an hour and a half, an hour and 40-minute class. So I want you to make a prediction in the chat window, if you will do that with me. So if you click on chat, you should be able to chat to everyone. Do you think that class session A or class session B is more of an active learning environment? Class session A or class session B? You're just gonna make a prediction. You can make it a random guess if you want. This is just looking at how the noise level is changing over time. Oh, okay. People are chatting just to me because I guess you can't chat to everyone, so I'll take it. That's probably even better because then you won't be biased by anybody else's responses. Okay, so make your prediction if you haven't yet. And I'm going to come back to this in just a minute, so hold on to that prediction you made. I'm going to tell you about a pilot study we did. We took 8 courses taught by 8 different instructors. We looked at 45 different class sessions. So like those 2 class sessions that I just told you, looking at just the noise level. And we trained a computer to actually analyze this. So what we did is we took a 15-second rolling window that would scan along and look at changes in both the volume, the decibel volume, and the variance. So the amount from the top to the bottom of the peaks as it kind of rolled along here. And we identified some different types of sound. And the sound we were hearing fell into these 3 categories: either single voice, like I'm doing right now, which would look sort of like what we see in green, where there's big variation. As I say a word, it's loud. As I pause, it's quiet, and so on and so forth. So you see big variation. Multiple voices tends to have high volume, but very low variation, like you see right here. That means many people are talking at once in a classroom, and no volume, of course, would be the lowest decibels with the least variance there. So what we did is when we trained a computer algorithm called DART to analyze this by having humans analyze it. So first we listened to these class sessions and recorded what was happening. There was some Q&A, some lecture, and this is one of the class sessions, class session A. See how most of it is lecture with a few other things sprinkled in? And our DART algorithm identified the same thing. It said this is mostly a single voice happening here. Okay. When we look at class session B, we saw something pretty different. There was a fair amount of lecture here at the beginning. Then there was a silent activity where students were maybe writing and thinking quietly. A discussion where it was really loud, where multiple groups were talking at once. And then some lecture and some video at the end. Our DART algorithm identified something quite similar. So single voice, some areas of no voice, and some areas of multiple voice. And what we know is that the active learning, when students are really actively engaging, is the stuff that's not single voice. So single voice tends to be a lecture. Multiple voices tend to be small groups working together. No voice ends up being things like individual writing, working on a worksheet, that sort of thing. So this is one way, and this is one of the tools that I've helped to develop to assess whether or not active learning is happening in a classroom. And this all was published a couple of years ago as in the study I showed just a minute ago. So if active learning is important, then what I really want to tell you about is how to structure active learning in a way that is going to be equitable and fair. So I'm going to show you these 21 teaching strategies from this paper that's shown down here at the bottom. And they fall into these general categories: giving students opportunities to think and talk about science, in this case, biology. That's my background. Encouraging, demanding, and actively managing the participation of all students. So giving students a voice, giving students space in the classroom, building an inclusive and fair biology classroom community for all students, monitoring your and your students' behavior to cultivate divergent biological thinking, and teaching all students in the classroom, making sure that everyone is engaged and supported. So this is a lot. I'm just gonna let you look at it for a second. And I promise this slide is gonna come back later as we think about how these equity strategies might be useful outside of a STEM classroom. And then I'm going to show you some evidence about a couple of these. So you might pay attention to which of these are maybe your favorite or the ones that you're most terrified by. And then we can go from there and talk about, if I don't talk about your favorite, we can talk about it during the Q&A. So the ones I'm going to talk about are random call, because that's the one that usually gives people like, you know, an increased heart rate and their cortisol levels go up and they feel stressed about. I'm going to talk about being explicit about promoting access and equity for all students. And I'm going to talk about integrating culturally diverse and relevant examples. And I'm going to give you some studies and some data that support why these are really important equity strategies. Okay, so if your favorite isn't on that list, ask me about it in the Q&A. We can come back to it. So let me just tell you a little bit about Random Call. This is another paper out of the University of Washington. They have such a fabulous science education research team and community there. This paper was called Gender Gaps in Achievement and Participation in Multiple Introductory Biology Classrooms. Okay, so I'm going to show you two pieces of data from this paper. The first is the gray bars here are showing the percentage of the class that are female identified students. Okay, just the percentage of students. It's around 60% across most courses, which is about equivalent of what we see in a lot of colleges. And the black bars in the front are showing how often female students actually ask questions in the classroom. So each of these bars is a different classroom, right? So we're looking at about 10 different classrooms. I've lost my cursor. Oh, here we are. These are all individual classrooms. And what we see is that on average, this bar here is the average. On average, we see students who are female are sort of underrepresented in asking questions in these biology classrooms. You see that? On average, there are about 60% female students, and yet only about 40% of the questions asked are from female students. So we see this identity characteristic playing into access and equity in the classroom. So this is about random call. So when the instructors here use random call, this is just kind of picking names out of index cards, popsicle sticks. You can use, there's apps on your phone that will do random call for you. They would find that there was much more alignment in the percentage of student voices that are female and the percentage of students in the class that are female. So on average here now with these classes with random call, we see it pretty equally aligns, right? So this is a piece of evidence that supports this equity strategy of random call. But some people are going to say, but I'm still stressed thinking about it, right? It's still stressful to go through the random call process and you might not want to try it. Well, this is another paper that is showing what a lot of experts use to support random calls so that it's done in a way that is anxiety reducing. So everything shown in orange in this figure are anxiety reducing activities. So things like allowing students to pass, just saying, hey, it's totally fine to pass, no problem. A lot of instructors, I do this as well, offer students the chance to be on a do not call list because some students are so anxious in the classroom that it's just going to interrupt their learning to even think that random call might happen. So a do not call list at the beginning of the semester is a way to say, hey, if this is going to actually increase your anxiety, let's not do that for you. That's not actually going to make it a more equitable environment for you personally. And I usually have, one or two students a semester who choose that option. So this paper has a lot of really great strategies for how to keep students accountable, increase the diversity of voices heard in the room, but also kind of minimize the anxiety that you might feel. This is from a group out of the University of Georgia. Okay, so I'm on to my second strategy. That was random call. Now we're going to think about being explicit and promoting equity and access for all students. And this comes from some of my own work related to instructor talk, which Jim mentioned at the beginning. What I did with some colleagues is look at a variety or an entire semester long introductory biology class, and we analyzed transcripts of that class. And we categorize all of the language that was not about biology, right? So most of what you talk about in a biology class is biology, but it turns out there's lots of other stuff that comes up. So you might have some predictions on what that stuff might be. Here's what we found. We found 5 different categories of instructor talk, as we called it, with a bunch of different categories. So things like explaining pedagogical choices. So explaining why the heck did I just put you in breakout rooms to do that activity? That would be one category. Unmasking science, understanding, promoting the diversity in science, being explicit about the nature of science, sharing personal experiences, telling stories about your own life, building the instructor-student relationship, and establishing class culture. These were the 5 categories of non-content instructor talk that we identified. And some of them are really important, I think, for promoting equity and access for all students, because for some students, it might not be obvious that we want them all to succeed, right? I hope my students know that implicitly when they walk into my classroom, but that may not have been the experience they've had in some other science classes. So letting them know that I believe all of them can succeed, boosting their self-efficacy, promoting diversity in the environment. There are so many things that we can do, that we can explicitly say, that can help students unequivocally know that they are welcomed and they are included in the science classroom, can be really helpful. So this study was the first of 2 studies we've published on instructor talk. And both of those studies have some examples of instructor language. I don't really have time to show them today, but if you're interested in that, there's lots of great language that might be useful, that you might add to your own instructor talk if you are a faculty member. If you're not, there are so many other places where this kind of language being explicit about things can be incredibly helpful in your personal life, in your professional life. So I hope it'll still be a useful technique. Okay, the third one I'm going to talk about is integrating culturally diverse and relevant examples. And this study on scientist spotlights comes from my colleague Jeff Shinsky, who's at now Foothill Community College, or Foothill College in, I think it's in Cupertino. Anyway, it's down in California in the Bay Area. And he did this fabulous study looking at how students' ideas shift in terms of scientist stereotypes. And so what he did is either give students just sort of a course reader homework where they would like read the chapter or something like that. And then in another case, he gave students a special scientist spotlight homework where they would learn about a scientist. And these scientist spotlights represent lots of different axes of diversity, including racial diversity, differently abled scientists, scientists from different cultural backgrounds and all sorts of things. And he looked at how their descriptions of scientists, how stereotypical their descriptions of scientists were. And what he found is that after doing just regular coursework, their stereotypical descriptions didn't really change. But after doing these scientist spotlights, he found a big change in their ability to talk about who does science in non-stereotypical ways. And this can be a really great way to add some explicit messaging into the classroom about who does science, because a lot of students just don't think that people like them do science. If they don't see a lot of representation, that might be the implicit message, is that people like me don't do science. So to avoid that, this can be a really useful strategy. And there's a whole new website that I'm really excited about called scientistspotlights.org, where you can go and find out more about these. So check out scientistspotlights.org. One of the coolest things about this website is that a lot of the scientist spotlights that have been developed for it were developed by a diverse team of undergraduate students at San Francisco State University, and I think also Foothill College. And so they're doing really great things. They're just getting started. It just launched this year, and there'll be many more added to this over the next couple of years. So check them out, because they have bios on these scientists. They have links to their websites and their research papers and things like that, as well as homework assignments that you could use to do these kind of scientist spotlights if you're interested. Okay, so I promised I'd bring this slide back because it was real busy and had lots of strategies on it. And I told you about just a couple of them. So I told you about random call. I told you about being explicit about promoting access and equity in the classroom. And I told you about integrating culturally diverse and relevant examples. But I said there were 21 strategies. There's many more, and there's lots of evidence that these support creating a more inclusive classroom. I believe they also can be helpful in creating a more inclusive dinner table or a more inclusive work meeting or anything else. So I hope that now I can get you to think about how one or more of these might be useful in your own personal or professional life. And I'm hoping that as we, and maybe even into the Q&A, you can reflect on that. Yeah, so I'm getting the question, can you explain the do not try to do too much? Yeah, so that is where, now I gotta find it. Oh, number 4. So do not try to do too much. Yeah, that was written a little bit strangely. But it's basically try not to overplan your class so that you're rushing through at the end and students can't actually have the time they need to digest the material. So I think I need to rewrite that as try not to do too much. And somebody's asking about monitoring student participation. Yeah, so I think that has to do with the, like when random call isn't happening, right? So if you don't have random call, you might notice that one student is always raising their hand. They're always willing to answer. Has anybody had that student or been in a class where that student was present? Right. And that tends to be the way things go. And that's not because that student's good or bad. That student has, you know, a willingness to respond. So monitoring student participation can help you figure out, you know, who is and isn't participating, who's being left out of the conversation. Yeah, so I think a lot of these are really useful. And so I do recommend going back to that paper, the 21 strategies. And I can put links to all of these in the chat window as soon as we're done, in case there's any that are of interest to you. But I hope that you will send me a chat now, or send everyone a chat if you're able, that gives a strategy that you might be able to use in your own personal or professional life, perhaps outside of a STEM classroom. And as you're thinking about that, I will just say, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for Zooming on a day when maybe you've Zoomed a lot, or maybe this is your first Zoom meeting all week, who knows? But I appreciate your time and energy tonight. And if you want to share out, you're also welcome to just hop on the mic and share your idea for how you would use these equity strategies. James, how would you, or sorry, Jim, share what your Think, Pair, Share partner told you?
Yeah, so you can do the think, pair, share thing, but instead of you sharing what you came up with, you have to explain what your partner came up with. So it's a good way to get different people to talk, or people to appreciate the viewpoints of the other folks they're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. So you don't just say the thing that you already said and you already know, but showing your listening skills and rephrasing their information. That's great. So somebody shared that they like number 15. These conversations are often held behind closed doors and not made apparent to the students that are affected by them. I completely agree with that. I've actually brought students to research conferences on biology education research, and they've said, wow, I didn't know that faculty thought about all this. I didn't know my professors cared about, you know, teaching all of us, or that they thought so deeply about these issues. So yeah, letting them know this is important to us is something that I think can be helpful. Anybody going to take equity strategies to their non-academic environment? Maybe a whip around at your dinner table of how was your day to make sure everybody shares.
Do it in meetings all the time.
Yeah, that's a good one. So a question I just received is about how would you connect or frame an instructional topic to social justice issues? It depends completely on the topic. In the biology that I teach, there are lots of examples. So I'm going to start my unit on photosynthesis and cellular respiration, talking about climate change and carbon cycling. That sort of is and that I think is very much environmental justice is a social justice issue, I would say. When I talk about viruses and HPV, I connect that to Henrietta Lacks and her cells because of cervical cancer and her cells being HPV positive. So there are lots of links out there. Yes, I'm going to put somebody's asking for the links to the papers. I'll put those in the chat. This is just a list of all of them. It's pretty much in order of how I presented them. Okay, well, I will just go to my final slide to say thank you so much again for your time. If you have any questions or want to discuss any of this further, this is my email address, seidelsb@plu.edu. This is stuff I love to talk about, so thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Shannon. That was awesome. I think eventually I can't see any questions because they're coming just to you as the host instead of the co-host. So I think eventually if you want to make me host again, I'm not sure if it's
Sure.
it shouldn't stop you sharing. So I think I can retake that possibly.
Retake the host duties. There you go. Oh, there you go.
All right. So if you have questions, please send them in the chat for Shannon and we'll ask her. But while you think about your questions, we're going to give away some stuff. So let's see, we have a few people in the room. I don't know, I usually do some random numbers, but I'm going to go with, yeah, let's go with that. So random number generator, how old do you think I am? So let's just go with that, random number generator. And the prize may either go to the person who gets it right or the one that's the most flattering. You never know. Just so you know, I love all of you so far. We have 45, 46, 48, 48. Anybody else got a guess? 49, 40. Oh, flattery. 21. Oh, come on, Erica.
Hi, Erica. I can't message you back because I'm not host anymore, but.
Jose, 29. Always 29, Jose. Thank you. All right. It looks like the person that's closest is Eric McDonald. So Eric, you get a pair of Think and Drink socks. So if you can chat to me whether you want small or medium/large, sorry, those are the only sizes they come in, let me know. And also send me just to me, because nobody else will see it, send me your address so I can mail them to you, or I can put them in your box at school. The other person who gets the most flattering, that wasn't just ridiculous, Craig Bartlett. So you're also going to wear going to get a pair of Think and Drink socks. So let me know again what size you want and where to send them, and I will get it to you. So thank you all for being here, and thanks for coming and checking out this awesome talk. And so let me know if you have other questions that you want to ask Shannon. Just chat them in there. Oh, somebody's asking what my actual age is. Sorry, 52 at this point. So you all would win for flattering. Nobody guessed high. Here's a question for you from Allison, my new colleague at UW-Tacoma. Does your use of equity strategies vary in lower versus upper division STEM courses?
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies for me, somewhat depending on the material and the time of semester. I would say I would say there's a lot of effort to sort of establish a culture of, you know, thinking about equity in the classroom early on in the semester. I think maybe lower division students might need that reminder more often. But I tend to use them across all of my classes. Certainly active learning is a part of all of my classes. I'm trying to think if there's a huge difference in equity strategies. Smaller classes, there's some strategies that are easier to use than larger class. Like a whip around is really hard to do if you have more than 15, 20 people. But you can do whip around within a small group. In a larger class that can work. So yeah, I think I use them pretty universally as best I can. And if I'm ever in charge of a faculty meeting or a department meeting or something like that, I tend to use them in those kind of settings as well. And also like public talks or conference talks and that sort of thing.
Cool. Erica asks, and actually Connie also asked something similar. What's the best strategy for remote teaching? And are any of these particularly good at asynchronous remote teaching? So not in real time.
That's a great question. I haven't done much asynchronous remote. I've been trying to mostly keep things synchronous, although I record most things that I teach so that students can access them later if they need to, especially during everything going on right now. I find more challenges than I find really excellent strategies that make this really easy. I think I use a lot of shared Google Docs that students can work in together so that they go into a Zoom room and then work on worksheets and things like that together. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily more effective than having them work on a worksheet. It's just trying to make the system work online. So if you have some strategies that you want to share with me, I would love it. Yeah, I think a lot of the online stuff is just trying to make it work. It's really hard. You don't get to listen in as much to the conversations because going into a Zoom room is really different than eavesdropping in a classroom. So a lot of strategies can be more difficult. But I guess the thing that's probably most effective right now is, for me, is instructor talk and trying to boost their self-efficacy, because they are so distracted by all the challenges of life right now that they just need some positive feedback that they're doing a good job. So I would say I probably use more instructor talk than ever. Also just to get them to turn on their cameras and to, just to hang in there.
Connie asks, do these strategies work with non-STEM courses?
That's a great question. I would love to know from colleagues who teach in other disciplines if and how these strategies work. I have guest taught in an ethics class and had the chance to use some of these strategies. I think things like a think, pair, share can be a really great way to get some conversation going before a larger group discussion in a humanities or social science kind of setting. So I think yes, but because I don't teach those courses, I don't know if I have the expertise to confirm that.
Jose says, what have you learned about yourself through this work?
Oh, that's a great question. I've learned a lot about my own identities and the assumptions I make about how students are gonna respond to things based on how I would respond to them. And so I think I've learned a lot about what sort of identity lenses I have well trained and what identity lenses I've had to kind of listen to my students and learn from them. So One example would be a student who came in last year and had to go home for a death in the family. And she said, I almost, after working with her to kind of, help her get through the course material while she was gone, she said, I almost didn't tell you because it was my uncle and I just assumed you would think it wasn't important. But, for her, this was a really important relative. And, so I've learned how, like, ways in which maybe I'm not just immediately approachable to students or immediately somebody they would consider on their side, so lots of things about sort of my own identities or how students view me.
Cool. And Heather asks, can you explain the what was written there? Use praise with caution. It was on your list.
Oh yeah. Yeah, use praise with caution, I think, is a really interesting one, because it's sort of, it might sound like don't praise your students, like don't use praise, but what it's really meant to be is to recognize that as you are praising students, you have a lot of power in the classroom if you're in the instructor, and if you sort of overpraise one type of answer, you might shut down other types of answers. So if answers are like, oh yes, that was wonderful and great and perfect, anybody else want to add to that? No one's going to want to add to that, right? Because it was already perfect. So thinking about the kind of status you convey with your praise of answers, by either praise or giving everyone praise. Thank you so much for your answer. Thank you so much for your answer. Thank you so much for your answer. And then kind of clarifying any details you want to, because maybe one of those answers was only partially correct, or there's something you're going to, correct in your response. But thanking students for their answer is a way of making, not shutting them down, essentially. It also can be a really useful tool for if you have a student who tends not to speak up. When they do speak up, you can praise more to kind of build some status for that student or some self-efficacy.
Cool. Any other questions? I think that is about it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much for an awesome talk, Dr. Seidel. I really appreciate it. I know that my colleagues in the STEM program and other folks at IAS are super interested in all the stuff that you're doing, and I think everybody else is as well. So I'm sure that you'll be hearing back from some of the folks that were in the room today to connect with you more, for sure. And I know that if I was teaching this particular quarter, I would definitely be hitting you up for all kinds of ideas and possibilities for collaboration. So thanks a bunch.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if other people have strategies to share or, wins when they try these things, please let me know, because it's a lot of fun to think about.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I know it was just a lovely day outside otherwise, now that we're at the time where it's dark by the time we do Think and Drink, and it's blowing like mad. So I hope you all have power. Well, obviously, that or you're on your phone at the moment. So I hope you all have power. Hopefully everybody stays healthy and well, and let me know if you have ideas for the November Think and Drink, and we'll be getting that information out. Otherwise, we will see you definitely in December, and take care, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.